It's a few seconds then, just as we wait for everyone to join. We'll give it about 30 seconds. Brilliant. Let's make a bit of a start then. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Cross River Partnership's 4th LiveShare session. I hope you're all keeping very well on this lovely day. So this session will be all about helping you ditch diesel, explaining some of the alternative options available to you. My name is Thomas Joyce. I work here at Cross River Partnership, and over the next hour or so, we'll be walking you through the benefits of switching, looking at it from both an environmental and financial standpoint. So just some housekeeping then before we make a start. I would like to mention that this live share session is being recorded and it will be available to view online. We'll signpost you to the link for this at the end of the session. I also know you'll only be able to see that there's just one person watching this event, and you might just be thinking, is it only me? Please don't worry, you're not alone, and I can assure you that there is more than one person here. It is also worth mentioning that we'd love for you to see our lovely faces live, but to ensure a smooth experience, we're going to keep to our headshots for this session. And on the note of a smooth experience, do make sure you've logged in via Google Chrome, as the LiveShare platform works best using this browser. So great, let's just have a look then at today's speakers. So during today's live share, we'll be joined by a number of experts from across the industry. These include Oliver Lord, Head of Policy and Campaigns at the Environmental Defence Fund Europe, Michael Smith, Managing Director at Brixton Business Improvement District, Brixton BID, Susanna Wilkes, Director here at Cross River Partnership, Kate Fenton, Project Manager here at Cross River Partnership, and then also myself. I'll be chairing today's session. We'll also be joined by Abby McDougall, our Air Quality Analysis Officer here at CRP, and she'll be moderating the chat facility to the left of your screens. I'll come back to that feature in just a moment. And also we've got Joshua West, who will be working on our behind-the-scenes tech support. So during today's live share session, we'll firstly provide you with a brief introduction to Cross River Partnership, in addition to some of the projects we work on here. We'll then move over to Oliver Lord from Environmental Defence Fund Europe, who will walk us through the importance of switching to sustainable transport mechanisms, looking at it from an environmental standpoint. We'll then be joined by Michael Smith from Brixton BID. Michael will be talking about some of the initiatives they are currently using at the BID to help their partner businesses operate more sustainably, looking specifically at their shared electric vehicle. And last but by no means least, we'll have Kate Fenton, who will walk us, who will talk more than about sustainable options for your businesses, many of which are being rolled out via CRP's DEFRA-funded Cleaner Villages project. So during the live share, there will be the chance for you to have your say via a Q&A session after each presentation. As I've mentioned, Abby will be moderating the chat to the left of your screen, so please do ask your questions in there during the presentations, stating your name and where you're from. We'll try our very best to answer all your questions, but if we are unable to due to time constraints, then we will try to get back to you. But also do feel free to contact us via email, and these will all be displayed at the end of the session. So before we make a start, we'd just like to pose a question to you, the audience. So we'd like to know, in your opinion, what is the biggest barrier you must overcome to ditch diesel? So we're really keen to open up a discussion on this. So please do pop your answers into the chat box. Abby will send that through to you. We'll also send the question in, and yeah, do let us know throughout the session your opinion on this and what your biggest barrier is in terms of switching from a diesel vehicle. So great. Let's move on. And so without further ado, Let's make a start. So I'd now like to pass you over to Susanna Wilkes, Director of Cross River Partnership. Over to you, Susanna.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to learn about how to ditch diesel and the contribution that this can make to keeping our air clean in a post-COVID era. As many of you know, Cross River Partnership was formed 26 years ago to build the Millennium Bridge across the River Thames. By now, we're actively helping with delivering London's future together, with all sorts of government, business, and community partners. CRP would like to thank its major funders for making this LiveShare session possible, Central Government Units DEFRA and Innovate UK's Challenge Fund, plus the Mayor of London. CRP is delivering a wide range of projects. One of these, Healthy Streets Every Day, is working across 17 boroughs to increase all of London's streets and their users' contributions towards a clean air future. Another, the Electric Vehicle Fleet-Centred Local Energy System, or ULEZ, is creating efficiencies in the use of smart charging to power the delivery vans that are used across London by UPS. Clean Air Villages is supporting businesses and communities to keep London's air clean as COVID restrictions are lifted. More on that later. CRP's vision is to empower people to deliver innovative projects that support places to survive and thrive. And we have been supporting the ditching of diesel for more than a decade now. This started with a transnational research project where CRP learnt lessons alongside other continental cities. The project was called Electric Vehicles in Urban Europe and identified the roles that all of the tools and levers shown on your screens need to play. CRP has also delivered projects on freight electric vehicles, zero-emission last-mile logistics, tailored and innovative solutions for freight, or freight tails. Links to all of these resources are being highlighted in the chat function right now. While none of us would have chosen for the COVID crisis to occur, it has provided an impetus for bold and urgent action. Across London's boroughs, low-emission neighbourhoods are being swiftly implemented to keep polluting vehicles out of residential areas, simultaneously cleaning up the air, facilitating walking and cycling, plus reminding about physical distancing in a post-COVID era. The first area-based Freight Delivery and Servicing Action Plan that CRP co-produced with the West End Partnership all the way back in 2018 is now being revisited, with a view to shaping the West End to be ready for a new and different future. A truly green recovery from COVID is within our reach. It's all a question of balance. With the right physical distancing interventions, with meticulous guidance and regulations, with intelligent and ongoing air quality monitoring, we can work together to ditch diesel. Here to tell us more about the benefits of going electric, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Oliver Lord, Head of Policy and Campaigns of the Environmental Defence Fund, Europe.
Hi everyone, thanks Susanna. Thanks for having me help to set the context for today's interesting webinar. I know people don't need another acronym in their life, but I'm from EDF Europe, which is Environmental Defence Fund Europe. So just to explain us, because we're pretty new to the UK, we're actually a very big American charity, which has been running for about 50 years in the States, working in everything from climate to ecosystems to oceans. But here in London, we actually coordinate the innovative project Breathe London, which is breathelondon.org. And this has been a project to put over 100 state-of-the-art sensor pods around the city to complement the regulatory monitoring network that exists in London as well. And it's a very interesting time to be doing this webinar. Actually, tomorrow we are experiencing a pollution episode, and all eyes are on Brixton. I can see from having watched the Newsnight clip last night on low traffic neighbourhoods. And of course, in my role up until recently, I was working at City Hall on transport emissions policy, and I know all about the history of Brixton Road and its unfortunate pollution problem being one of the most polluted roads in the UK. And when we talk about pollution, we're talking about especially two pollutants of major concern to us here in London. We've got PM 2.5, which is 2.5 micrometers, really small. And it's a complex mixture really of solid liquid particles, but some really nasty stuff that is either organic or inorganic. But you can imagine it's the stuff from the diesel vehicles, which the WHO has classified as carcinogenic, being especially problematic for us. And hardly anywhere in London actually meets the World Health Organization standards for this. But we've also got nitrogen dioxide, which is a gas that especially damages lungs and hearts. And believe it or not, we were meant to meet the legal limit for this back in 2010, and we're not expecting to do that anytime soon, and perhaps not for another 5 years, which is of grave concern to a lot of us. And particularly at risk there are the elderly, pregnant women, and we also are aware of the links that are emerging between air pollution and the severity of COVID symptoms. And what's causing this problem? Well, I mentioned diesel just before, and I've presented here the latest understanding of sources of these emissions in London. And you can see that whilst road transport is causing roughly half the issue, but actually when you get to by the curbside and the roadside, you can imagine that that contribution increases potentially up to about 80%. But when you drill down into of the road transport, what's the issue? It is predominantly diesel. It's up to about 95%. So when we look at those sources as well, we've actually been doing some work as part of the Breathe London project to get right in there at a local level and start to determine, well, when we look at that London-wide pie chart, how does it actually look more locally when we actually record air quality and look at the activity in the area? We know that like cleaner business activity means cleaner air. So we did a piece recently with Global Action Plan, which showed that a lot of the commercial activity, such as heating and powering the buildings, but also the delivery vans and large goods vehicles, are contributing quite a lot to the pollution in that area. And we have seen during lockdown up to a 30% decrease in nitrogen dioxide in that area. And you can start to attribute it to that activity. We're actually soon going to be publishing this sort of local source level data for all of our Breathe London monitoring sites. And I did some preliminary analysis just before joining, and around 25% of emissions in the Brixton Road area are coming from diesel cars and vans. And this webinar is also about helping you to prepare for change, because it is coming. So I've presented here just some snapshots to represent that. We've seen a very ambitious sort of plan or intention, so to speak. The plan's not quite there yet, so we'll wait to see, from the government on decarbonising the transport network. We've also seen progressive policies in the city around the ultra-low emission zone, but we're already seeing local authorities wanting to go further, understandably. For example, the zero emission street that the City of London have brought in on Beach Street in the Barbican area. And that all fits into a more global picture when we look at the intentions that have been put forward by global cities like New York, Los Angeles, London, and Madrid in the Green and Healthy Streets Declaration, where they're talking about introducing zero emission areas in the center of their cities. And this is really important, especially for this webinar as well, because when we look at that decarbonising transport piece that the government put out, it shows that van traffic has more than doubled in the UK over the past 30 years. And there's been a 67% increase in van emissions. And indeed, in the City of London, or in London, sorry, overall, we're seeing that vans are increasing in volume, and nearly all of them are diesel, and it's the only type of vehicle on our streets that is increasing in volume. Cars, lorries, all the others are decreasing as an overall volume. And there are, of course, climate benefits of switching to EVs. And a lot of people say, if you do the climate stuff, you get the air quality stuff, and if you do the air quality stuff, you get the climate stuff. And we must tackle these things together. There's a great, neat diagram there from the European Environment Agency, which shows just how much conventional vehicles can get more efficient. You put 100% of the energy from the fuel into the vehicle, and you end up with only about 20% of it powering the wheels. And we also know that petrol and diesel cars emit almost 3 times more CO2 than the average electric car in the EU. And of course, that does depend on the electricity grid mix. And that's a great piece of analysis there from Transport and Environment, another NGO active in this field. So the cars and the vans on our road are currently contributing about 19% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. And there are, of course, economic benefits, which I've tried to represent here on this slide. So, the drive for electric vehicles can really create a surgence of more jobs and industry growth in the UK. So I've got a couple of examples there with the announcement of the partnership between Arrival and UPS, the delivery firm. And then likewise, I've also mentioned there the London Electric Vehicle Company, who developed the electric taxi, but are now trialing that as a van with Royal Mail. And I think this shows how much that we're at this point where we could actually be creating lots of opportunity for the country. And also then from a business perspective, of course, it makes sense because you lower fuel costs. There are government grants available at the moment and lots of incentives that you can put towards saving money in your business. And also, I think the piece here is all around the competitive edge as well, because when you look at those areas in London that are now starting to transform, where local authorities are now starting to talk about zero emission streets, then it actually makes sense to be looking ahead as a business and getting that competitive edge in early. I think to try and put this into perspective as well, we've seen some estimates that, for example, an electric Renault Kangoo van, if you kind of look at the equivalent diesel variant, that could cost up to around £2,800 less to run over only a 3-year period. And I think finally, given all the understandable attention on the NHS recently, if we look at the greater cost saving to our society from schemes, and here I've highlighted the policies that have been put forward in London so far, the ultra-low emission zone, for example. There's a cost saving there to London's NHS and social care system, totaling up to about £5 billion over the next few decades. I mean, that is significant. So I think, there is something, of course, to mention around being able to charge these electric vehicles in London. And I think the first point to make really is that I think roughly about a quarter of all the charge points in the UK are available in London at the moment. And there's lots there. There are lots of plans underway. And I know the Mayor's Office, which I worked on quite closely, have a plan for the next few years. But I think that also needs to be informed by how vehicle technology is changing and how charge point technology is changing as well. And we know that businesses will require greater support for those that without off-street parking, and we should probably help to prioritize that for the high mileage fleets that a lot of you use, because actually when you relate it back to the emissions, that's a win-win really, because we do want to see overall a reduction in sort of the use of private vehicles. And I think there's also an opportunity here for us to seriously consider, and I think potentially the work that Cross River Partnership does, bringing all the businesses together, how businesses can get more clever at sharing charging infrastructure as well, especially where they have off-street depots where you're not going to open it up necessarily for the public to be using, but perhaps deals can be done between different businesses where they can be mutually beneficial. And the important thing there is about saving that cost of having to upgrade those sites as one business alone. And there's some very interesting work going on at the minute with the UK Power Networks with a project called Optimise Prime, and that's looking at how the profile connection agreements for those sites can vary throughout the day rather than things being too rigid for businesses. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully that's set some good context for the rest of the discussion. I really look forward to hearing how the work in Brixton has been progressing, because it sounds very exciting.
Brilliant. Many thanks, Oliver. Yeah, you've raised some really interesting points there. Let's then have maybe a little bit of a discussion around it then. So some of the points in terms of electric vehicles and obviously the zero tailpipe emissions from those particular vehicles, are you seeing them as potentially the silver bullet then in helping combat this current air quality crisis we face in London?
So I would probably immediately answer that as no. I don't think there's one silver bullet to addressing the air quality crisis, but switching to EVs, and especially the high mileage fleets where people do need to be using their vehicles, they can go an incredibly long way. We do need to reduce diesel emissions as soon as possible, and this is where electric vehicles really come into their own, as I mentioned about the carcinogenic links. But it is definitely a game of two halves, I think, with the rollout of electric vehicles. We need to be much more clever in how many vehicles are ultimately needed as well, because, you know, and match that with even cleaner mobility. So I'm thinking, like, for example, e-cargo bikes and making sure that more walking and cycling trips can be done as well. And I think also we need to remember that when I was talking earlier about the particulate matter and the PM2.5 emissions that we have a problem with, the tyre and the brake wear from vehicles also will remain an issue for quite some time.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's not just the tailpipe emissions we're looking at then. Interesting. Okay, because I can see that Fred Rogers in the chat has put quite an interesting comment in around making better use of our railways to deliver freight, so not just having them on the road, delivered in vans and trucks. What's your thoughts on that, kind of shifting more and looking more to use the railways for delivering our freight into the city and using potentially Crossrail and other links to get into more central locations within the city?
I put my hand up, I say I'm no rail expert, but I do know there are challenges related to that. I think, you know, we do need to see more freight taken off the roads, and that includes, for example, the river as much as it includes the rail. But I do know there are also challenges related to how, I suppose, the compromise you have to make on using the rail network and how that coincides with the introduction of more passenger services as well, because we are trying to get more and more people out of their cars and using public transport in the long run. So, for example, the service near me, the London Overground service, is actually constrained at the minute because of rail freight on that line. So I think there's a balance to be played, but I think it's totally right to be raising that as an opportunity, especially when we're building new infrastructure. For example, the HS2 link. Whether that presents any opportunity, I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, so yeah, that's really interesting. And there's also kind of, you could look at it in the form of having different kind of last mile deliveries, in terms of they don't necessarily have to be done by van. We could be looking to do it via cargo bike, or then even looking at electric vehicles to do that. And I know that Kate will be mentioning a little bit more about those initiatives from the Clean Air Villages 2 project that we delivered last year. Okay, great. So maybe if we just have a look, how much time do we have left? Maybe we could pop in one more question. So Oliver, do you think then that the 2035 diesel and petrol car sales ban is soon enough? And if not, what can be done in the meantime to help reduce our road-related emissions?
That's a good question. I think, you know, at Environmental Defence Fund, we're always trying to make sure that we're working with industry, with the grain, but we are a critical friend. And I think the ambitions put out from government, the 2035 timescale to ban sort of diesel and petrol car and van sales, I think that could be brought forward. I think there needs to be a bit more ambition. Perhaps 2030 is the right date for that. We saw the Committee on Climate Change have said that actually that should come to 2032 at the latest, and they are like the best experts we've quite possibly got on this, sort of critiquing the government. And that would be similar to like other areas like Denmark, for example, the Netherlands and Sweden. And I think also maybe there's a bit of a missing piece on like some other vehicles that would help to control pollution in the city as well. So for example, buses and taxis, again, linking that back to the manufacturing industry we've got in the UK. But in I guess like introducing all of this, we also need to address that issue about supply of electric vehicles. So it's okay to be bringing forward that date that we ban these vehicles in the next 10 years, but I think there needs to be a very solid plan on supply. And one of the policies we've been looking at, especially with the experience in California, is around a mandate on manufacturers who are selling these vehicles in the UK that they have to have a zero emission vehicle sort of proportion of sales every year, which has really driven the market in California, for example.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Oliver. We'll just have one more question then, because I can see that one's been asked in the chat from Alex Lewis Jones. Alex says that you mentioned that we were exceeding legal limits on air quality. Are there going to be further legal challenges and a failure to act on air quality, and against whom? So I think the question, yeah. So
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's helpful to raise, the Client Earth case has really made a difference. They took the government to court 3 times, the government lost 3 times, and that's how we ended up with this plan for clean air zones around the country in the national plan. I think some of the focus now is on, I think there's some acceptance that plan is ambitious enough, but it's to follow through. So we're now starting to see other authorities across the UK delaying those plans for clean air zones, and that is going to be a big challenge if we are actually going to try and meet these legal limits. And the date for these legal limits is 10 years ago, so now it is about doing it as soon as possible. I think the other concern a lot of us have is around, dare I bring up Brexit, but around leaving the European Union and not having a new environment bill in place that the government intends to bring in the autumn. If that is rushed through or it's not in place by the end of the year, then we may end up losing any function for someone to be enforcing this stuff against the government.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Oliver. Yeah, and a really good presentation there. Thank you. Great. So on that basis then, let's head over to Michael Smith from Brixton Bid. Michael is the Managing Director at the Bid, and he'll be walking through some of the initiatives they're using and that they've adopted to help their partner businesses operate more sustainably. So over to you, Michael.
Hi, thanks. I just want to, can you hear me very clearly? Yeah? Let me establish that first.
Yeah, I can. Maybe a little bit faint, but I can make it out. It's all good.
Good. Right. So I kind of want to spend a couple of minutes just talking about a specific project in Brixton, rather than looking at a number of different projects, and just to walk you through what we did in terms of that particular project. So we're talking about the making of evil. We call it a Brixton story, because what we set out to do was a project that would electrify Brixton businesses. That's what the original project was looking at, and that's what we ended up doing. But the key bit of the project for us was engaging with businesses and making sure that we had the right partners on board. And that was exactly where the challenge was for us. So if you so the start of the project, we looked at local businesses who either had some experience of electric vehicles or no experience, but businesses who were using diesel vehicles to transport their goods. The other key partner for us was the local authority, and fitting into their campaign and to the issues that they wanted to achieve in terms of electric vehicles in the area. You'll see the project steps that were set out for the project. So yes, it's about establishing local interests, and it's also about making sure the people that we want involved were the people that we got involved. How did we do some of this? The project launch was in December 2019, but as far back as 2018, what we started to do, or what this Crossriver Partnership started to do, was to create seminars on a particular area of Electric Avenue. And it was not coincidental that the area was called Electric Avenue in Brixton, but that was specific because we felt Electric Avenue as an area also fitted in to what we wanted to do in terms of electrifying Brixton. So we did that. But also, if people know Electric Avenue, it's an area kind of proliferated by a number of shops. So we felt that in that area, we had a number of the business that we wanted to engage. So we interviewed about 200 businesses in and around Electric Avenue, off Electric Avenue. We also, Crossriver Partnership also made sure that they attended a number of public functions. It might seem unrelated, but the exercise was also about getting the word out there in the community beyond just the area that you wanted to influence. So we also looked at identifying some key stakeholders, and one key stakeholder would have been Zipvan, because they were going to be the key partner in there. And then we created some case studies, and those case studies were taken off Electric Avenue. Because there were not many people who were familiar with Zipvan, what we did was we brought Zipvan in the area to create a bit more exposure. Now, working up to the launch date of December 2019, we didn't have an electric vehicle. But what we felt was important, that it was important to give people a sense of what the vehicle may look like. So we brought in a number of vans that gave people an indication as to who the partners were going to be and what the project was going to look like, what the project vehicle would look like. One of the other key things that we did was establishing a baseline agreement with some of the partners that we were going to be working with. Here on this slide is just two example questions of what you found in the baseline agreement and some of the response that we got. So from the baseline agreement, we could establish from the answers that most people had no experience of working with an electric vehicle. We also wanted to get a sense of what would they do after this project, because you wanted to create a level of sustained change. So would they simply revert back to their old vehicles after the project, or would they be looking at, would we be able to change the behavior by the project to get them to look at an electric vehicle for themselves? With all of that exercise taking place and activity, we successfully, I think, approached our launch date of December 2019, and you will see there some of the key project partners: Crossriver Partnership, the local authority, local businesses represented from Zipvan. And on that day, we had our electric vehicle present for our business partners and our participating businesses to see. Having created the project, the next task was to look at how are we going to measure success. One of the ways was measuring success was ensuring that the project lasted for the 12-month duration that we set out. We had about 42 businesses at the outset expressing some kind of interest in the project. We ended up with about 14 businesses between February and June and July regularly using the vehicle. We achieved vehicle mileage by the 31st of May in excess of 4,000. And what we were able to establish was that the average mileage used by the average participant was about 13 miles. So we'll come back to that later, because what that also established for us was that our participants were not high mileage users. Going forward, what are we looking for going ahead? So we're hoping that going ahead, what we will see is an extension of the project, hopefully beyond the 12 months. And now that the Brixton bid has taken over as the key partner, relieving Cross River Partnership of this task, we're hoping that our local connection will justify an extension, but will also increase uptake. What we're also looking to see is whether any of the 14 or more people who have participated so far, and the additional people who may participate for the rest of the project, whether they would themselves replace their individual vehicles with electric vans. Building on the concept of shared uses, what was important. I don't know if many of you have to deal with small businesses, but, and I'm not saying this as a criticism of small businesses, but small businesses are very individualistic in their outlook and not as organized as larger businesses. Getting a lot of these small businesses, 14 or more, to share the use of the electric vehicle for us was an achievement. You know, that meant that they had to book ahead. That meant that they had to bring the van back when they said they would. That meant they had to work in a way knowing that it could be their very neighbor who was going to use the van the next time. So the concept of shared usage grew for us and came out as a significant achievement in looking ahead. We're hoping that as a result of this project, what you will see around Brixton itself is an increasing number of charging points. So we're hoping that out of this, you will see not just in Brixton, but in Lambeth, an increasing number of charging points, which will in turn, we think, give more individuals the confidence to say, I may want to use an electric or purchase an electric vehicle when I'm thinking about replacing my personal or commercial vehicle. Right, I hope that was helpful. I'm sure I was within my 10 minutes, so I'm quite happy to take any questions if there are any.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, that was a really good insight into a great initiative for businesses to adopt. So yeah, let's have a look. There has been a question from Garin, actually. And Garin said that it's great to see so many businesses taking part. Are there any refrigerated kind of vans that these businesses are using? Is there an option for that within the shared vehicle?
No, there's only one shared vehicle, and it wasn't refrigerated. But interestingly enough, there has been some talk about refrigerated vehicles and the need for that in the local area. So refrigeration. So that is just something that needs to be looked at as in looking ahead. But no, the one vehicle that we have is not refrigerated.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael. Yeah. So it's great to hear then that there's so many businesses using this particular shared van, but you did mention that some of those businesses have their own vans. Are they now leaning towards potentially getting rid of those vans, or are they thinking of changing their own fleet themselves to electric? Do you have any kind of thoughts on that, or what's kind of their situation with the shared van?
We haven't got a sense of that, but you have to understand that before we brought the project in, that a lot of these businesses were doing their own deliveries and collections and whatever that they needed to do with their own commercial vehicles. And some are also using, a couple, not many, were also using zip vans, diesel vehicles, whatever. So that remained an option for them. For us, the project was about luring people away from that resource and getting them to use the electric vehicle a bit more, which would then, we hope, would influence any decision they want to make at a later stage in terms of replacement of their vehicles. We haven't yet had a report about any vehicles being replaced and whether they have been replaced at all or with an electric van. So we're waiting on that one.
Great. Thanks, Michael. There've been a few extra questions actually from the audience. So So Alex Lewis-Jones has asked, did participants who are using the van have to charge it themselves, or was this a part of the service from ZipVan?
Interesting. They had to put the vehicle back on the charging point. So that was a challenge. They would take the vehicle from the charging point because there was one identified charging point for this vehicle, and they had to replace the vehicle to the charging point. So that was a challenge. And in more cases than not, it was achieved. So you would go and you'd find the vehicle parked and on charge for the next user to use.
Brilliant. And then 2 questions from Caitlin. Quick, we've still got some time left, so we'll go ahead and ask you then, Michael. So what were the biggest challenges you saw from small businesses sharing the van? Did it require different kinds of business planning or operations planning? And maybe the second part of the question is, particularly for now, are there any concerns around COVID-19 and transmission within the van from sharing the van between businesses?
Yeah, let me start with the last question first. So we asked ZipVan, our partner, to put in COVID-19 measures to ensure that the van was cleaned regularly and to the high standard. We also encourage people to take their own COVID-19 precautions in terms of having sanitizers, in terms of wiping their hands before and after, and wiping the vehicle down. So in a way, we tried in a double whammy way to address the issue. We have yet to hear anything about about any kind of infection coming from that vehicle. We don't expect to, because ZipVan are very careful in terms of cleaning the vehicle in between usage. In terms of logistics, it was interesting that a lot of some of the users were fruit and vegetable carriers, and they had to leave the vehicle in a clean state for the next user, because you would never know what the next user was going to be doing. Or even sometimes you find that the next user would also have been a neighboring business, and they were probably going to the same place. What would have been a wish would have been having a larger vehicle where businesses probably could have shared delivery. But the vehicle was never large enough for that. But it was about getting people to work, knowing not competitively, but cooperatively. So they had to work out which days they were going to go to the same market, and not to try and compete with a person who was also going to the same market, but just getting in there. So they had a rhythm of whether they went to market on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and the other person went on, Thursday, Sunday, Saturday, something like that. But that was established in a very natural way. I'm thinking.
Perfect. Well, great. Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you for providing such a good overview of the shared van you've got in Brixton. Thanks, Michael. So, perfect. So let's then go over to Kate Fenton. Kate's project manager here at CRP, and she manages Cross River Partnership's DEFRA-funded Clean Air Villages programme, which is now in its 3rd phase. Kate will be talking more about the projects, its initiatives, and some of the pioneering work being rolled out across London to help businesses operate more sustainably. So over to you, Kate.
Thank you for the introduction, Thomas. Good afternoon, everyone. So here's my agenda for everybody to see. I'll just start by explaining what the Clean Air Villages 3 project is, or CAV as we call it. So CAV is a 1-year DEFRA-funded air quality project, and we're pleased to be able to deliver this project for a 3rd year running. Westminster City Council are the lead authority, and CRP is delivering the work. We're working with a total of 16 partners, so 12 local authorities and 4 business improvement districts. The project's aims are to reduce congestion and pollution through education, interventions, trials, and by implementing solutions. So we work in air quality focus areas, and they're areas that are identified due to their levels of high pollution and high footfall. And we call these areas villages because each is unique and requires a tailored solution. So whilst the first 2 years of the project, named CAV 1 and CAV 2, which was highly creative, I know, we focused on business deliveries and servicing. So now in its 3rd year, we've actually expanded our remit to include communities and hospitals as well. So we asked each partner which of these strands they'd like to choose, and we could also create a hybrid as well. So local and tailored operations take place in the villages, but there's also cross-borough activities taking place too, which creates great synergy. So there are too many project activities to expand on here, so I'm just going to highlight a few that are the most relevant for this particular LiveShare event topic. So we work with fleet managers or business owners who are contemplating switching to EVs, and we're able to offer free trials via EV suppliers, but I'll expand on that shortly. So we also encourage the use of suppliers who use zero and ultra low emission vehicles. And we also explore shared low and zero emission vehicle schemes, as you know, because Michael has already explained about the Brixton EV. So we also produce case studies to share best practice, more on that to follow. And we also increase awareness of the advantages and availabilities of EVs. So as the cliche goes, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So I thought this was useful to share. This is the CRP team out and about, conducting surveys, running workshops and events, meeting businesses, all of which encourages behaviour change that we hope will have a positive long-term effect on air quality. A huge amount of business engagement takes place for CAV, and we're currently doing this digitally. So we certainly haven't let this pandemic stop us from delivering this vital work. So as previously highlighted, we work on case studies, which are all available online. I know Abby has shared some of the links in the chat already. So we use these during our engagement activities. So as part of CAV2, we created 9 business case studies and 5 more in-depth how-to case studies, and they're incredibly helpful in inspiring behaviour change. So I'd just like to highlight one now that we did about the Brixton EV, but from a business perspective, which is the one on the top row, second from the right. So this shows 2 businesses that have been using the EV since it launched late last year. And I have a quote from Abdul of Abdul's Fruit and Veg, who said, "This van is the way forward for small businesses. I will be the first to buy an electric vehicle." And I know there have already been a few queries about the businesses using it. And Abdul at the moment actually has his own diesel van. So this is wonderful news that he is thinking of switching should he need to buy a new one. So the ultra low emission zone will expand into Brixton from October next year and will impact businesses like Abdul's. So this was a really opportune time to launch that scheme. And business owners will be faced with increased charges if their current vehicles are not eligible. So this slide shows 5 more in-depth case studies or how-to guides. And I know that Michael has previously already talked about the EV, but I just wanted to add a few comments on this from the side of things in terms of the local authority. So it definitely the scheme wouldn't have been possible without the persistence and efforts of Lambeth Council in pushing for the funding to pay for it, but also in finding a parking bay. And I know we've loosely touched on the parking bay. So funding was eventually found from the Community Infrastructure Levy, and a parking bay that was found with a charging point had to have a traffic management order put in to convert it into a car club bay. So these were just a couple of barriers that we faced as part of this. Additional delays were to do with actually getting hold of the vehicle because they were in short supply at the time. We got there in the end though. Huge thanks to Lambeth Council, Brixton Bid and Zipcar for all the hard work. It's also worth adding in relation to the Brixton EV that once the vehicle arrived, it was only really the beginning. So we spent a lot of time building good relationships with the businesses who'd signed up. We really wanted to get candid and helpful feedback so that we could tweak the pilot. And thank you so much to Brixton Bid for taking over the day-to-day management of the initiative since CAV2 ended. So you can look at those case studies. We'll share those links with you afterwards. So moving on. So here's a taster of some of the local solutions that we're exploring for CAV3. As you can see, there are a diverse range of air quality initiatives. So we work on consolidation, we work on remoding, we're also exploring cargo bike schemes, which we did a lot of last year. We're also looking at active travel schemes and ambassador programs. It's definitely a case of watch this space. So here is the CRP CAV directory. So it's a free online tool which lists businesses and suppliers who deliver or use zero or ultra low emission vehicles or who deliver on foot. So they must guarantee, to be on this or to be eligible, they must guarantee that they use these modes a minimum of 80% of the time within the village areas. So we're always looking for new businesses, and our teams sometimes spot branded EVs or bikes, etc., which we find really exciting, and when we look them up to contact them. So I'd like to encourage you to share in the message chat here if you can think of any businesses that may be eligible that operate in London that we may not already know about. We'd be keen to hear from you. The directory Also lists businesses who deliver on foot, like I've said, and also it's not just business to business. So individuals can find businesses online on this directory who deliver, for example, champagne and bread. And just to shout out as well that we have, for the new village areas and the new partners as part of CAV3, we have expanded these tools into those new areas, and they each have their own dedicated local site. So that launched on the 10th of July. So CRP has been meeting with EV providers as part of the CAV project to understand their offering. We're then able to provide information and/or introductions to small businesses who may be interested in switching. I know right at the start of the LiveShare, Abby was asking in the message chat about what barriers businesses face when it comes to EVs. And certainly cost is one thing that comes up. And I know that there are plenty of barriers when it comes to range anxiety and things like that. There's definitely a lack of understanding and awareness about EVs. And so what we can do is try and make this process easier and save small businesses, particularly small businesses, valuable research time, because they don't have a dedicated fleet manager or similar like some of the bigger businesses. So we're able to link businesses with EV providers who can then offer free trials of their vehicles. And understanding a business's existing vehicle usage is really key before they make any decision. So we're able to offer businesses that are within or operate in the CAV villages telematics dongles. So you attach these dongles to your vehicle and it will monitor your usage. So stopping periods, mileage, that kind of thing. And then Clean Car, who make them, will produce a report for that business. And it's based on your individual usage. And it can then recommend suitable vehicles that are available on the market and give you recommendations. So finally, this is just to highlight a few of the next steps that we're doing on the CAV project. There's much, much more that we do, but I've tried to just tailor and focus things here in relation to EVs for you. So that's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kate. Some great work going on there to help businesses operate more sustainably. Let's just have then a little bit of a discussion, shall we, just around kind of the project and your opinions, particularly around EVs. So do you think, I know that you mentioned a few other initiatives that the CAV project is, or the Clean Air Villages project then is helping businesses to adopt, but do you think it's a one glove fits all approach with EVs? And should some businesses maybe start to look at other options for deliveries and delivering goods?
Yeah, so I think that if we replace every diesel vehicle with an electric one, then we're not solving the congestion issue, which is a problem. And EVs also emit particulate matter, so from brake and tyre wear. So we have to be careful about promoting them as some magical solution. And I don't think that there is a one size fits all or one glove fits all approach. And so that's why with the Brixton model, it was also promoting the shared vehicle concept, which we thought is really important because we want businesses to, or people to question whether they actually need a vehicle at all. Could they actually share one? And obviously, we also want to encourage businesses to look at other sustainable delivery options, and cargo bikes certainly spring to mind. People are often quite surprised at what they're capable of in terms of capacity and weight. Can they deliver a sofa? No. But yeah, it's a challenging topic for businesses, but the market is pretty dynamic. And there isn't a financially viable EV to suit everyone's needs just yet, but things do move quite quickly.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Okay. So keeping on kind of that train of thought then, so if a business, for example, wouldn't be potentially able to transition potentially to a cargo bike because maybe they're delivering sofas, or maybe they can't use an EV because the range is too short for the journeys that they'll be doing, what kind of would be the next best option, would you say, for them to do if they can't maybe adopt a sustainable delivery method?
So I think there's a number of things that businesses can still do to reduce their impact on air quality. So even if their vehicle is more polluting than they'd want it to be, so delivering or using it outside of peak hours can make a difference to air quality. And also thinking about really logical routing to reduce your mileage can make a difference. And also, so if you're a business with incoming deliveries, you can encourage your suppliers again to deliver outside of peak. You could also try and coordinate delivery days with your neighbours if you've got suppliers in common. You can try and order less frequently, you know, if you have storage space. And consolidation of suppliers in your street or area will have an impact on the number of vehicle movements and should reduce pollution. So there are plenty of other things that you can do until the technology or or the costs come down for you to be able to switch if that's what you want to do.
Great, thanks, Kate. Okay, then I think we have time for one more question, and I can see that Alex Lewis Jones, has put a question into the comment box. So, who uses the directory, and how do you encourage traffic to the directory? And Caitlin has asked a similar question as well.
Sure. So with the directory, who uses it? Obviously, that's quite difficult for us to track. We can get analytics on the number of people visiting, so the number of users, but we know where they are in terms of their IP address, but we don't know whether they're an individual, a business, who knows. But the way that we promote it, or have promoted it as part of CAV, has been via our networks. So newsletters, social media, via our partners. We get our partners to promote them to promote the directories quite extensively as well. And moving forwards into this year with the project, because we're working with communities as well, we're quite keen to make the directory relevant and appropriate for a much wider audience, so more consumer based. And so we are going to think about how to effectively promote it in that way.
Brilliant, thanks, Kate. I can see we've had a few more questions in the comment box. As we're running out of time slightly, what we'll do is we'll pass them over to you, Kate, and if you could get an answer for them, we'll send them back over to, I believe it's Alex and Caitlin. So we'll get those answers over to you both very shortly. So great. So thank you very much, Kate. And what we'll now do is we'll just head to a final discussion question. So I'd like to pose a question to all four speakers. What we'll do is we'll go in reverse order of who presented. So we'll start with Kate, and we'll go Michael, Oliver, and then Susanna. And the question is, with the upcoming 2021 ULEZ expansion, what would your final piece of advice be to a business looking to make their fleet compliant? And just conscious of time, if we could make it around about a 30-second answer each, that would be great. Kate,
okay. Sure. So I would say to a business, step one, check whether your current vehicle is eligible. It takes 2 seconds, go on TfL's website. And step two, really truly assess your vehicle usage and costs, because until you know that, you can't make an informed decision about your vehicle. And then step three, act now, because when ULEZ expands in October next year, it's just going to come around sooner than we think. So start planning now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate. Let's head to Michael.
I would say the answer is pretty clear. You've got to ditch the vehicle, really, ditch the diesel. Any kind of investment in and around compliance is an investment around, I think, business existence and business expansion. So, there might be a cost in investing to be compliant with the new ULEZ zone, but it will create the basis for the continued existence of your business and the possible expansion of your business. But you should also look at the possible of a tiered approach to ULEZ. So it's not just about getting the biggest vehicle, but looking at other things like e-cargo bike. And I said earlier that the Brixton users are not large or high mileage users, so it's quite possible that e-cargo bike could also work in there around ULEZ compliance.
Brilliant, thank you, Michael. Over to you, Oliver.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo a lot of what's been said already. I suppose get ahead. I'd give that as a tip from my presentation. It's going to pay off in the longer term. Think carefully whether you can just jump from the diesel. Don't just upgrade the diesel if you can't help it. Go electric, because of all those strategic plans set out by the government and global cities, we're definitely headed for a zero emission future.
Brilliant. Thank you, Oliver. And finally to you, Susanna.
Yeah, I would echo my colleagues and say that businesses should try to be as proactive as they can, and that they should really try to embrace sustainability in as many of their business practices as they can, so that they actually thereby generate new customers, new products, and new services.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Susanna. Okay, then so what we'll quickly do is, before you all leave, we'll do a final poll. So we'll do a last kind of question for you all. I know we did a question at the beginning. We'll do final poll now, so we can bring that up. So quite a simple question, but what will your next vehicle be? If you don't maybe own a business, think about maybe your personal vehicle. if you've got one. So it'd be great to see. We'll just leave it for about 3 or 4 seconds. Perfect. Great. So, well, it's great to see. We've ditched diesel completely and we're moving over to more sustainable methods. So perfect. Great. So if we just head back to the presentation then quickly, and just before you all leave, I'd like to point you into the direction of our next LiveShare session. And this will be on Thursday, August the 13th at the same time. The topic for this session will be pedestrian priority streets, the benefits for schools, businesses and your health. The speakers will talk about the benefits and the importance of having pedestrian priority streets in the city. And as the title says, for your schools, for businesses and also your health. So the Eventbrite for this is actually now live, and Ab will be posting that into the chat. So please do sign up to that now if you've got the time. But if not, don't worry, we'll still be posting it via our social media platforms and our newsletter. So do remember to sign up and follow us on these methods. And yes, we'll be posting them there regularly, so you'll have the chance to sign up if you can't do that today. Do remember that this live share, past live shares and all of our future live shares will be on our YouTube channel for you to watch whenever you want and for also to share with whoever you want. So yes, that's it from us. I'd like to say thank you to all our speakers for some great presentations today, really thought-provoking. And yeah, thank you to all of you for joining us today. And yeah, we hope to see you all very soon. So thank you very much and goodbye.